everybody, welcome back to Cardvoyant. I'm Kris and I'm your Cardvoyant, and I'm here again today with my sisters Kim and Pam. And we thought we would do another video on just some things that we've experienced along the way in our spiritual journey. And today we're going to be talking about signs from the other world or from the non-physical world, and also just kind of spiritual experiences. Because we just feel like all of us have these, and we three have had, plenty of them, but also that people that just in their everyday lives may not realize the experiences that they're having, and yet once you start talking about it, or once you hear a conversation about it, you can come to realize the many ways in which you've been contacted from the non-physical world. So I wanted to first talk about some of our first spiritual experiences. I didn't have a lot as a kid, as a very young kid, but I did. But I think a lot of that was based in fear. I don't know, for whatever reason, the way that I sort of experienced religion and growing up in a very traditional religion was that I was afraid of a lot of things, including the religion, including, dying and everything pretty much. So I think that I was shut off for a lot of years. And then when I started sort of being more willing to open up, in fact, I was always really interested in it. I always sort of wanted to have these spiritual experiences, positive ones. But I just was so shut off. And then as I started to get into my 20s and 30s and stuff, I was much more open to it. And that's when I started having more spiritual experiences. But one of the first ones that I had that was just such a major sort of undeniable experience was one that Kim and I shared. And we were with a lot of other people, and we really don't know if anybody else had this experience. We know nobody in our immediate family did, but we did, and we didn't know it at the time. Right. As it was happening, we didn't know that we were both having the same experience. But what had happened was that one of our relatives passed away, and he was a young father, and it was a very tragic accident, very extremely sudden. We had all been at a family reunion, a few days, just a couple days before. Yeah, and he had very young children, and it was just this great person. So we all went to the funeral, and the chapel, the church main chapel, had bifold doors so that you could open up and have overflow, and that's what was open. And we were sitting right at the edge where the overflow began, and so you could only see forward into the chapel, so we didn't really know what was behind us or above us. But we were sitting there waiting for the funeral to begin, and I was listening to this music, and I was listening to this song, and it was a hymn that I loved. And I was thinking, this choir is beautiful, and it was so clear to me that I was singing along with the lyrics. And I remember specifically that it got to the second verse, and I didn't know all the words, but I could hear them. Yeah. I knew them in that moment. I could hear the words that were being sung. So anyway, when the funeral ended, we walked sort of forward into the main part of the chapel. And of course, there was no balcony, and there had been no choir. And it was just so clear to me that it was a choir of angels. Mm-hmm. And all during the time that I was listening to it, and afterwards when I was I didn't know that you had had the same experience as well.
Right.
And so you were sitting there, I guess?
I was sitting there. I had the same exact experience. And the only thing that I remember thinking at the time is that there was some part of me that knew it was angels. And it's just whatever the spirit in me connecting with that, whether it's memory, it's like spiritual memory, or whether it's just a knowing, I'm not sure, but I knew that. And so when we got in the car to go home, we were both sitting kind of stunned and kind of silent. And I turned to Kristen and I said, did you have any kind of like weird like experience like during this particular song? And she looked at me, she's like, do you mean the angels? And I was like, yes. So we were both
See, I knew it at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we were both just stunned at this, and like Kristen said, undeniable experience, because we both had it together. So many times you have them on your own, and so
Yes.
you can undo them, or you can think that wasn't real, or what was, that was just my mind playing tricks on me. But when you have a shared experience like that, there's not any denying it, so.
And it's interesting too, now that you say that, is that this really, and I don't know if this was one of the first experiences for you, but for me it was the first truly undeniable experience. I mean, I'd had some other things like at Grandpa's funeral and just a kind like small experiences, but nothing of this that was like so undeniable, and then to have someone share it. But it was honestly from that point when I started opening myself up more to that kind of experiences, being less afraid of it. And I don't know if it would have happened if it hadn't been something that I, couldn't deny because you had experienced it too.
Right.
But we do, most people, and maybe you as you're watching this are thinking about experiences that you've had, because so many people, I mean, everybody has these experiences. But they aren't always recognized. They're definitely your spirit guides, people that have passed on, especially trying to comfort you after their passing. But there's all these people that are in the non-physical world trying to reach out to you all the time, help you along the way. I mean, life is tough for everyone. So you can imagine trying to help someone that you love from the other side once you've passed. And it just happens all the time. And some people are not as willing to acknowledge it and kind of shut themselves off. And yet when you get in kind of a safe space, as we are now, hopefully, where you can discuss it or think about it, all of these things come up, these various experiences come up. And they can be comforting like that. They can be sort of instructional. They can be affirming, like, you're on the right path. This is the right road, that kind of thing. And they can come in many different forms. That was music, but it was also such a visitation in a way. So it was,
and it was attached to something that was familiar to us at the time, which is religion, which is like an organized religion that we were in at the time. So it made sense to us.
Right. And that's the thing too, is spirits, or however we wanted to talk about people in the non-physical world, they will reach out to you in ways that ring true to you, or that are specific to you, or ways in which that you could easily understand them. And we don't know if other people shared that experience that day, but if it had happened, if it did happen to other people, having that particular hymn, a choir, all those things would have made sense and would have been comforting, particularly in those circumstances, and particularly using that tool. So, but music is something that is very common, a very common way for the non-physical world to contact this one. And one of your first experiences, Pam.
My turn.
I'll just turn this way.
Yes.
And one of your first experiences also had to do with music. And it's been, not that our teenage years were that long ago, but but I have remembered
I don't know,
it.
when you hear the song I referenced,
Yeah, right.
you'll realize now.
But I remember you telling me at the time, and it's just stuck with me that I remembered it so well. But it had to do with music,
Right.
and it actually
a lot of stuff. But a lot of times it's mostly signs of comfort for me when I get music, but that's usually how I feel connected to the spiritual world or whatever, is through music. So I was a teenager and I was flying out of state by myself for the very first time. And I remember the night before I was so nervous because I just hadn't flown a lot at all, maybe once or twice before, never by myself. So I was very, very nervous. And I remember just laying in bed that night before and thinking, just give me a sign that it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay, and please, Heavenly Father, tell me it's going to be okay. So anyways, I went to sleep, and I, when my alarm went off, my clock radio, the first song that started was Bridge Over Troubled Water. And I remember just knowing that it was just, that was for me. That was to let me know it's going to be okay. I can just,
and it was so clear that it was an answer to your
right.
the night before. Yeah,
Exactly.
there was like no question.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah,
and,
it was.
and you were saying that you've had other experiences with music,
Yes.
particularly in relation to our father.
Mm-hmm. My dad and I had a fond memory I have is watching this PBS special of Roy Orbison's, and I think it was called the Black and White Special is what it was called, but it was in black and white. So you may have seen it because it's been on a few times. But we watched it when the first time it was on, and it was always just kind of a fond memory. We both really loved it, and he, in fact, well, I won't go into it, but anyways. So after my dad died, I used to always have dreams about him, and so I started connecting the song that Roy Orbison did called In Dreams, which I love that song, to my dad, because I would just think in dreams is where I see him, and the words of that song just fit so perfectly. So whenever I would hear that song, I'd be like, I'd fall into a weepy mess, but I always connected it to him. So a few years, probably about 7 years after he passed away, I got laid off from my job, and it was just kind of a troublesome time. I was not really sure what was going to happen. I was very nervous about everything, and I would have a lot of anxiety and sleepless nights. But one night I woke up, and it was about 3 a.m, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to go back to sleep. I'm not going to just lay here and toss and turn. So and I'd been thinking about my dad a lot because he was always the touchstone. When you had problems, you'd call him, especially problems like this, work and money and whatever. So I'd been thinking about him a lot and wishing he'd been there, at this time. And so I got up this night and just thought, I'm just going to watch TV because I'm not going to be able to go back to sleep. And I sat down and I turned on the TV, and it was Roy Orbison standing there. And he just finished singing something and was getting ready to sing the next song. And it was a different special. It was in color. I remember it was just him. But I remember thinking, if he sings In Dreams, I'm going to lose it. And sure enough, just right after I thought that, the chords for In Dreams started, and I did. I lost it. I lost it, people.
And Dad thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. I just knew. I'm like, because how would that happen?
Right.
That
Yeah.
song is, 50 years old. And, and Roy Orbison was dead by that time. It wasn't like, what I mean? It wasn't like...
He wasn't on the top 10 at that time.
Exactly, yeah.
That's all you're saying.
And so it was just, I just knew that,
It's
it was...
crazy.
And that brings up like a couple of things actually. One is that a lot of times when, at least I have found, I don't know, it's like I know this for sure, but it seems like when either your guides or the other side finds a way they can communicate with you, they'll do it again and again.
Yeah.
They know, like for Pam, clearly they know they can reach her through music, so that will happen.
Right.
It will keep happening, and especially if it's acknowledged by the person, then it's like, oh, we got through. It's like, it is like a communication thing, like we got through. Keep doing it that way. But also it also brings up like, well, how would he do that? Does he go to this TV station and make them play that song? But what it is that special was on, and she woke up at a certain time. It's like he was basically prompting her to go out and see that and know that he was there, that he was aware of what was going on, and that it would be okay. And that,
Because it probably wasn't the first night that you'd been anguished. So
Yeah,
he's like, when is that special going to be on? Because I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
seriously, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's really true. And it is very true that the more something happens, like when the other side is able to connect to you, it will happen again and again because you've recognized it, and hopefully you've acknowledged it in some way, and then you start to get many more messages. So Kim we've all had a lot of different experiences, but Kim, of all of us, has had more sort of like visitation experiences and several related to Dad.
Yeah, I've had a lot of dream visitations. But I mean, now, because I'm kind of moving into medium work, I will get, visits from, spirits, but it's very much on my terms. I'll invite it in and then let it release it. That's kind of how it is, and it works for me. I'm comfortable with it. It's fine. This particular one that was particularly strange, and again, it was one of those things that was undeniable because of the way it happened. So basically, my dad had been sick, and he was basically had terminal lung cancer. We were taking care of him kind of around the clock, so it had been a very long last couple of weeks of his life for all of us. It was very difficult. When he passed away, we kind of stayed together as a family, and talked about how we should proceed with things. And I got home, and the next day, it was the night before the funeral, so it was a couple days after that. But it was being there when my dad passed away, and just being in the midst of all this, it was a very spiritual experience for me. I don't, everybody has their own thing, but for me, it was a very spiritual. I felt very close to the spirit realm during this time. But that's an aside. The night before his funeral, up until then, we had been getting phone calls early in the morning, late at night, for different reasons, because his health was going downhill. So I woke up, and it was probably about 1 a.m, and I woke up and I saw my husband standing in front of me, and he had his hand up like he was on the phone, which was not an uncommon thing, because we had just gone through this thing where we were getting calls all times of day and night. And so I watched him walk back and forth with the phone, and he was just listening. He wasn't saying anything. And so I thought, oh my gosh, what has happened? And I was worried about my mom at the time. So I just thought, oh my Lord, what has happened? So I watched and waited, and I probably waited a full 10 seconds. And finally I said my husband's name to get him to tell me what was going on. And he sat up next to me. So I had been watching a person walk back and forth, and I was waiting for him to say something. And what I realized, it's like one of those what is it called, the moment when you're like, whoa, and you realize something in a movie. It was like that, because I realized that I had been watching.
Zoom in on you.
Yeah, what I believe now, and since then, to be my dad. The reason I didn't recognize him, though, as my dad was he was young. He wasn't the age that he was when he passed away. He looked like a young man. And he was kind of walking back and forth, and he had his hand up like this. And that was the other thing. I kept thinking, why did he have his hand up? Because I thought he was on the phone. Mm-hmm. But what I remembered was that he had a growth on his neck when he passed away that was really, and I think that he may have been seeing that it wasn't there anymore. That's the only thing I could think of, was that it was like he was just feeling it, that it wasn't there. But it wasn't I didn't feel like he was showing himself to me, or like he'd appeared to me or anything. It was as if I was in a different consciousness, or a different whatever dimension or something, for just a moment, and I could see it. And then once I kind of realized what I was, confused at what was happening, it almost was like it disintegrated. Like I lost it. What it reminded me of was like the Disney magic eye pictures, where you get it and you kind of stare at it, and then you can lose it because you're not concentrated anymore. That's what it felt like. It felt like I just lost the concentration or whatever. And I don't really, when I see things, it's always in my mind. It's always in my mind's eye. I don't usually see things like figures in front of me or anything. So I know, for me, even as working in spiritual things, that wasn't a usual thing for me, because I don't get a lot of seeing people actually. But I see it in my mind's eye, which is kind of like your imagination, but it's like in your mind's eye you can see it. I don't see physical things like that. So I understand why it was so easy for me to lose that. But it was an undeniable experience, because I wasn't thinking I wasn't in that mindset when I was watching it happen. I wasn't in the mindset of is that a ghost? Is that my dad?
Yeah.
Is that a
Yeah.
spirit? I wasn't in that mindset at all. I thought I was watching a living person.
And you told us all. I remember you
Yes.
telling me like right away.
Yeah,
it was
too.
like a big
Yeah.
thing that
Yeah.
had happened to you.
And of course I scared my husband to death because he jumped up and ran around and turned on lights and freaked out. That might be why I also lost the image.
But it is interesting that you mentioned like in your mind's eye, because that's anytime that I have that during readings, it's almost like a shape. And the one time that I had it with family was when our aunt was ill and passing away, and I was in the hospital, and for some reason I was in the room alone. Some people had walked out, and I felt our grandfather, who would have been her father, so close by. In fact, I had walked the corridor earlier and felt him like he was behind me or something. So I sort of turned. I was by her bed, and there were chairs over here at the end of her bed. And I sort of turned, and in my mind's eye, I felt like there were 3 people there. And it was sort of like tall, and then shorter, and then very small. And I felt like, I was like, who are these people? And I couldn't, and I sort of figured it out that, it was my grandfather, and I'm trying to think, but the small one, I'm like, who is this small, very small person? And then I realized it was our great grandmother. So it was her grandmother, but she was sitting. It came to me as though she were sitting. And it was that, I don't know, it was very comforting, but it was also this feeling of a watch. Like we were keeping watch on our end in the physical world and ready to have her leave, to lose her sort of. And they were in the non-physical world doing the same thing, but waiting to greet her. So it was just, I don't know, it was very nice to feel the presence of my grandfather again, because he died when I was quite young. But also just, it's such an interesting like interplay of the two realms,
Two worlds,
So
Well,
it was
and it's interesting too that you say it that way, because I've done a few readings with people who have people that are terminally ill. They're near the end. They're farther along in a disease, and so often when I'm able to kind of tune into the person, I will always see people from the other side there, and I'll kind of get an idea of the relationship. Like it could be, they're like older than them, or they are, whatever, parents or brother or whatever. But I always see them as though they're almost like administering to them. Like they're kind of like they're, like you say, kind of over, like looking over them, watching over them. But it's almost like they're assisting them as well in some whatever spiritual way or spiritual preparation in moving to the other side.
Right.
It's always so comforting to the feeling that I have seeing that for other people. It's so comforting.
Yeah.
It's like I want to translate that to them because I want them to know it's okay. People are there. It's okay.
Yes.
They're in good hands, basically. So,
right.
But yeah.
And I would imagine there are a lot of people watching. I know we have them in our own family. Stories of people who are about to pass away, and they're talking to somebody that they see in the room that nobody else is seeing, but it's somebody that has passed away. Sometimes it's a spouse or a parent.
Well, it is kind of that moment in time when the two realms meet.
Yes.
For an individual, but if you're around it, you feel it.
And that's it too. If you happen to be there and the circumstances are right, where you can feel it, and where it's just right, and then it's because I think it's there all the time. I mean, I think that's just the standard of how it happens when people pass over. It's the ability to sort of tune in and let it happen. And often, in times of trauma, and I think this is true when people lose someone that they're very close to, it's hard to feel that because you're so caught up in the emotions of the trauma itself. But I really believe that's a time when people are definitely trying to connect to you.
Right.
And, trying to reassure you and comfort you and all of those kinds of things. And speaking of which, so we have a story that is sort of a collective story that many of us in our family have experienced, from like our mother to all of us in this generation, and then the generation below us, the grandkids. with our father. And it all started from, maybe it started earlier, but when we recognized it, was that my youngest son was having a wedding reception. And it was the first time in a very long time that all of the sisters were going to be together, and that a lot of the grandkids were going to be there. So it was just this really, it was this really kind of cool time. And I was, of course, we were doing it at my house. And so I was like cleaning up all the time, trying to get everything in order and everything. And I kept finding dimes. It was like getting ridiculous. Like I went into this one bedroom and I found I must have found 12 dimes just in that bedroom. And then I would be in the kitchen and I'd find like a dime here or a big there. And it was just like, what is with the dimes? Why are people dropping dime? I mean, can't you hold on to your dimes? And what's funny is that when my sister came from out of state, I was telling her, I'm like, I keep finding dimes everywhere. And I had like 20 dimes that I had collected just in my house over the period of like a day and a half or a couple of days. And she said, well, it's like Sylvia Brown says. I'm like, well, no, I don't. And she said, dimes are messages from heaven, is how she put it. They're, people trying to acknowledge you and let you know that they're there. And we were both like, Dad, immediately. But it was also one of the few things that we'd all been together at after he passed. And then from that day until now, we just find dimes at the oddest times, at the various times for us that have meant, meant something to us in particular, difficult times. The son that I was talking about that had the wedding reception, we of course we told everybody about it and what was happening with dimes, and then we had some experiences, and he had a couple of very difficult years, and he was connected to my father in that they both served in the Army. So he came home and he's like, Mom. One day he's like, Mom, does that dime thing still happen? And I'm like, I don't know, you tell me. And he said that he'd been laying in his bed, and his bedroom was here, and then the bathroom was kind of just out the hallway door. And he heard literal clinking, like something was falling. And he's like, what's that? And he went out to investigate, and it was like 3 dimes that were just laying on the bathroom floor that had hit, there's a metal runner in between the carpet and the linoleum sometimes. So it was this metal runner, and he thought that the clinking was the sound of them hitting the metal runner. But it was such an odd circumstance that he would be laying in his bed with his door open, which was very odd. And he heard it, and he's like, it freaked him out. But I said, Grandpa's looking out for you. But it was a very hard time for him at that, at that period of time in his life. So those two, well, first of all, the million dimes in my house.
Yeah.
But then that was the same house. And it was just those two really stick out in my mind. I don't know which ones for you, because there are so many.
I had a dropping dime incident.
Did you?
Yeah, when I first moved out of state, it was another difficult time. But
Life
we
is hard.
hardship, but we really don't. But I had moved out of state, and I was kind of like not really thrilled about it. But it was literally maybe the second day I was there, and I'd gone to Target to get some things, and I was using one of my niece's cars, and I probably was just, I don't remember my state of mind at the time, but I'm sure I was just depressed and anxious, and although it was fine, everything was fine, but I was unsure. I think that was more of it. I was just unsure of what the future was going to be. So I get in the car and I hear like that, and I'm like, and I look in the cup holder, and there's just a dime like right in the center of it, just crazy. And I'm like, that was weird, because I knew it wasn't there, because and to hear it, and because it literally drew my attention to that, because that's where the sound came from.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was right there. So
That's the same kind of thing. So
Yeah, and I think the biggest one for me was one with our mom, and it's a huge decision she made when she was living on her own, and she'd lived in one place and she was moving out to another place, and she was so unsure about it, and she kept saying, I just wish your father was here to tell me it's fine. I wish your father was here to tell me it was okay. And we moved her out, and everybody was kind of on their way to the other place with the last of her stuff. And I said, I'm just going to go and just make sure there's nothing else left, and because everything was gone, and we vacuumed, everything was gone.
We'd done everything.
And I came in and I went through every room, and in her room, right in the center of her room, was a dime. So it's just stuff like that where it's just like, it's so clear that it's like, it's fine. Now, again, I want to be to the logical point, is that my question is always like, well, how does he do this? How does he do this? So I can tell you one way, because I don't think they're being like created and then they're, like he's creating them and then throwing them out. I don't think it's like that. But I'll tell you one experience that kind of tells me at least one way that he's been able to do this. And I was standing in line at McDonald's, which we love McDonald's. But when Cassie was smaller, we'd go all the time to get the Happy Meal toys. But anyway, we were standing in line, and we were on a family trip, and it was a trip I just kept thinking, I just thought of my dad a lot. I just thought he always loved road trips. I wished he was there. I wish he could see Cassie at this age. It was just one of those times I just kept thinking of him and thinking of him. So I was standing in line, and this guy's in front of me, and he pulls out this bunch of change, and a coin falls. And the guy goes down to pick it up, and it's like he changed his mind, and he went back up and just got back in line and put his change away. And I was like, you know what? There's something weird about that. And I thought, if that's a dime, that's at least one way my dad is doing this. Like, people will drop it, or we'll drop it, or whatever, and we won't pick it up, or somebody else won't pick. It's like it's more like a prompting, or like a something more with like the don't pick up the dime, that kind of that kind of thing, rather than like he's making them and tossing them out. But that's what
and draw your attention to it.
And then draw your attention to it. Because I think about that like with other signs, such as and it was a dime. Did I say that? Okay, it was a dime. I went down and looked at it after he moved. But the other thing I can think of that's like that, where I feel like you're prompted to look at it. It's not like your guides or the spirits on the other side are making this happen, but it's when you see numbers consecutively. I think you guys were talking about that. You see like 1, 1, 1, 1. I always see my birthday. I always see 10/29. And
oh, you do?
Yeah,
I didn't know that. That's cool.
But I always see that, and what I think it is the same thing. They're making you aware to look. It's not that they put the numbers there. No. It's that they're making you aware to look there. Right. That whisper in the ear, or that speaking to you in your mind, or in your mind's ear, whatever. That they're getting you to look, and then that can be a lot of things. I'm not sure. I did one reading where they said that it was the woman's father that was doing it, that was making her aware, and it was to get her to be in the present moment more, because she was constantly in her head and full of worries and full of anxiety. And it was his way of getting her to just focus on the now. Just be, because in that moment, she'd always realize, oh, it's 111. She's in that moment. So it was like her way. It's almost like he was trying to jolt her awake just for a second. And it was their shared moment, which I think is another thing, is that they want to share a moment with you, whether it's calling your attention to numbers, or to butterflies, or to birds is another one.
Right. And I think with numbers, because I've had a couple people ask me about numbers too, and it's like, what does this mean? Like, what's going to happen? Because I started seeing these numbers. But I had somebody ask me in a reading, what does it mean? I keep seeing these numbers, and I think it's different for every person.
I think so too.
And for this person, we sort of got talking about finding joy in the things that you do. And that's what they were drawing attention to. It's like, stop, look what you're doing, because you're in a joyful moment. And it was like, trying to get them, I think, to move in a certain direction by understanding what it was that they loved. And so you'd see these numbers, in that joyful moment. So it's, there are, I was going to say also with the dimes.
Yeah. Sorry.
So there are, but I was going to finish that thought. Sorry. There are different reasons for these things, and they can be very specific to you. I mean, they're probably general things too, but I know that when you read like on the internet or something like that, what does this mean? It's very general, and it may be very different in your particular circumstance. But as times I was going to say about like the dropping and things too, I do believe there is, this is just me, you guys might disagree, but I do believe there is the ability on the other side to sort of manipulate energy, because we are energy. So if there are dimes around,
Right.
like if there was a dime in your car that could be pushed
Yeah.
or, moved, then that dropping sound, or I don't know, maybe they can manipulate things to make us hear what
Yeah.
seems
Right,
like a
right,
dropping
yeah,
sound.
yeah.
I don't
That's-
know.
That's true.
Well, I've heard that too, because with the manipulating energy, because
Yeah.
when Dad first died, apparently we only hear from Dad, but when he first died, I was living at home at the time, but then I moved out shortly after that, or a few months after that.
Mhm.
And when I moved, the first maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks I was there, at least 3 nights a week, my stereo would come on at night, in the middle of the night,
That's crazy.
and start playing music.
Uh-huh.
And I kept thinking, what is wrong with this thing? I think it had a short. And I would turn it off, and it would happen again, and it would start the next night or a couple nights later.
Mhm.
And then I kind of was like, I don't like this. I wish this would stop. And it stopped, because it was scaring me in a way.
Uh-huh.
And I think I don't know for sure. At that point, I wasn't very spiritually minded. I was still, I didn't really know
Right.
much about it. I didn't find out till later that many people have experiences with people manipulating electronics from the other side, or so they think. And I think it was so soon after he died, and I think he was trying things.
I say, and our dad was an engineer, so
Yeah,
if
he
there was
was,
ways to
exactly.
do it,
I'm
we
sure
figured it
he
out.
was.
You would have loved it.
Yeah.
And that's how often these signs come. There's can be very specific to the person, whether it's butterflies or birds. They're just something in nature that naturally draws your eye, So I don't have, to me it's been like dimes and a couple of things with other people. I've had songs too that come on when I'm thinking about a person, like I'll be driving and I'm sort of thinking about a person, and a song that I associate with that person or the time period that I knew that person will come on, and it's just like, oh, thanks, or good to hear from you, kind of thing.
And I think that's the main thing, is just
Yes.
when it happens, there's nothing you really have to do, or because people always ask, like, what should I do? And it's like, you don't really have to do anything.
No.
It's just a nod, or it's okay, or whatever try to put it in context with what's going on with you at the time. Am I worried? Am I, so like maybe it's comfort for worry, maybe it's like you're on the right track. Try to put that, in context with what's happening, and then just thank them. Because if you do, and they realize, oh, we got a connection here, it'll keep happening, and that will be the way they connect with you.
Yes, and that's the main thing too. Is speaking of people who don't really acknowledge these things, but then if you're talking about it, they're much more willing to open up, or it'll suddenly remind them, oh, I had this experience one time, and they haven't really thought about it in true spiritual terms because they didn't know that other people had experiences like this. So by doing a video like this, hopefully, you can start to think of some of the experiences that you may have had, or somebody that if you are willing to talk to them, maybe they'll open up and start hearing, remembering things that they've experienced as well. And the thing is that is the whole point. There can be a better connection between the physical world and the non-physical world. And the main thing is that there are reasons for everything. We're not alone in this, and that it's okay. We're okay here. We're not like thrown into isolation somewhere and just, you get through life on your own. There's help always out there. There are caring, loving beings out there all the time, no matter what your situation is in life. And if you are willing to open up, you'll see some of those connections and feel some of those connections. Well, I'm sure we all would. Everybody who's watching would love to hear some of your experiences. So if you'd like to share them in the comments, I'm sure everyone would love to hear them as well. Anything you're willing to share. And I hope that you'll come back for some more videos that we hope to be doing. I'll be doing something for your channel, Kim's channel. It's called Intuitiview, and it's easily searchable on,
Yeah.
on YouTube.
Yeah.
But she does all kinds of amazing work and some interesting stuff. So if you haven't seen it, be sure to go check it out. And we'll do more instructional videos, more like this. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Appreciate you subscribing. It's just been great to see the response. So hope to have another interesting video for you soon. Until then, bye.